5 siblings with our father, and she never came back. And then my father eventually left us in the house alone, and we ended up in foster care. So I had wrote a book about my foster care story, a gifted child in foster care. And when I wrote this story, I felt like I would never, ever find my mother. But about in 2018, March 2nd, 2018, I actually found my mother. And so I ended up writing a story, Finding Mother After 5 Decades. And this is the first book of a 4-book series, and I'm going to read from the first chapter of this book. And it's called, the first chapter is Before Mother Left. She has to be somewhere. That is what I used to exclaim, frustrated when my mother seemed to have vanished into thin air, and all of my search efforts were coming up null. Why did she have to leave? Why my mother? Why do I have to endure such a devastating heartache? Most importantly, why can't I find her? Those were the thoughts and questions that lingered in my mind over the years as the trail of my mother's whereabouts was getting colder with each passing day. Even though I was only 2 years old when she left in 1969, I can recall the vivid details of numerous events that took place at that time. One of the most heartbreaking memories I have is this one. My mother picking me up in her arms and walking out of the back door of our rental house. She walked across very tall, uncut grass to the back area of the lawn, lay face down in the grass, and cried her heart out. I lay beside her, and I cried with her. At the time, I did not understand why she was so miserable that she would sob so heavily in front of her little girl. I only remember feeling heartbroken for her. I felt her pain so very deeply. It was like her pain was my pain, and I hurt terribly for her that day. I later learned that my father had called the authorities to have her picked up and taken, against her will, to a mental hospital. So during that moment of weeping in the grass, she knew that she was about to be separated from her family. It seems as though my father had been insensitive to his wife's illness, but I guess if she was posing a threat to herself and others, my father may have felt that he was doing something good. Here's a less heartbreaking, yet deeply hurtful memory. I was in the car with my family when my father and mother began to argue. I was no more than 1 or 2 years old, but I remember feeling like my father's voice was loud and abusive, and my mother's was quiet and hurt from the dispute. I felt like the argument was not fair because my father was louder, stronger, and angrier, while my mother seemed weak and unable to defend herself. During this particular quarrel, my mother took me in her arms, got out of the car, slammed the door, and walked away with me. I do not remember if my father had demanded her to get out or if it was her choice. I only remember her getting out of the car. While I do not recall anything that happened after that, my older sister Carla often expressed her surprise about how my mother and I made it home before they did, even though they were in a car and my mother had left walking. When I really look back, my time with my mother was a painful one. Although I have always remembered both good and bad, the bad was ugly. I heard stories about my mother's mental illness causing her to experience episodes, which resulted in her harming my siblings and me. Overall, my father and mother had a strained relationship. They both endured an enormous amount of pain, resulting in the breakup of our family. Growing up, I blamed my father for my mother's emotional state. I felt like his physical abuse caused her to leave us. Over the years, my brother Jerome tried to explain to me that our mother really did have a serious mental illness, and our father was not to blame for that. You don't understand, Grace. Our mother was not the same person that you think she was, Jerome used to say. He remembered it better than I did because he was the oldest of the 6 children and I was the baby. He explained to me that my father physically harmed her because she physically harmed us. Although I continue to blame my father, I do recall an instance where I know it to be true. My father came home from work one evening to find bruises on me. My mother had beaten me with a broomstick. In turn, he gave her a beating with the same broomstick. Not understanding the concept of revenge, I felt deep sadness for the lady who gave birth to me. This is the only time I remember my mother hurting me, but not the only time I witnessed my father hitting her.